The trading station orbiting Kepler 442b had been silent for 3 days when Captain Sarah Chan's exploration vessel, the Harmony, dropped out of hyperspace. What should have been a bustling hub of interstellar commerce, home to over 50,000 beings from dozens of species, now drifted like a tune through the cosmic void. Picking up life signs, Captain, reported Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka from the sensor station. But they're strange. All the readings show beings are alive, but there's no movement, no communication signals, nothing. Sarah frowned at the main view screen. The massive station, built like a gleaming wheel against the starfield, showed no external lights except for basic navigation beacons. No shuttle traffic. No commercial broadcasts. Even the advertising holograms that usually painted the hull in garish colors were dark. Dr. Martinez, what's your assessment? Sarah asked, turning to the ship's xenobiologist. Dr. Elena Martinez was studying her readings with growing concern. Biologically, everyone appears to be functioning normally. Heart rates, brain activity, breathing all within normal ranges for their respective species. But there's something else. She paused, checking her instruments again. I'm not detecting any dopamine, serotonin, or equivalent neurotransmitters associated with positive emotions. Not in any species aboard that station. You mean they're depressed? More than that. It's as if the capacity for joy has been completely removed from their neurochemistry. Sarah's blood ran cold. 3 months ago, they'd received the first reports from the outer colonies. Entire worlds falling into inexplicable despair. Celebrations stopping mid-festival. Children refusing to play. Art galleries closing because no one could appreciate beauty anymore. The reports had been so bizarre that most of the inner worlds dismissed them as mass hysteria or some kind of psychological warfare. But, now, seeing a major trading hub reduced to this hollow shell of existence, Sarah understood they were facing something far worse. Captain, called Engineer James Park from his station. I'm detecting a massive energy signature moving through this system. Whatever it is, it's big. Bigger than anything in our databases. The main screen shifted to long-range sensors. At first, Sarah saw nothing but empty space between the distant planets. Then, the computer enhanced the image, and she gasped. A structure, if it could be called that, was moving through the system like a living shadow. It was roughly spherical but seemed to shift and writhe, as if made of liquid darkness given form. Tentacles of pure void extended from its surface, reaching toward planets and moons like the arms of some cosmic octopus. Size estimate? Sarah asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Approximately 800 kilometers in diameter, James reported. Mass readings are impossible. The sensors keep fluctuating. Dr. Martinez looked up from her console, her face pale. Captain, I'm picking up transmissions from that thing. But they're not radio or quantum communications. They're neurological. What do you mean? It's broadcasting directly into the minds of every sentient being in range. Some kind of psychic transmission. And it's not random, it's targeted, surgical. Whatever this entity is, it's specifically seeking out and destroying the neural pathways associated with happiness, wonder, creativity, and hope. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 50 years ago, and they were still considered newcomers by most species. But even in their brief time among the stars, they'd never encountered anything like this. Any identification of the entity? Cross-referencing with all known databases, reported Communications Officer David Kim. Captain, I'm getting hits from some of the oldest archives in the galaxy. This thing has a name. His voice was barely a whisper. The Zentrans called it Vorthak. The melody referred to it as the Joy Eater. The Crystalline Collective named it the Silence Bringer. Dr. Martinez pulled up historical records on her screen. According to these files, Vorthak has been active for over 3 millennia. It moves from system to system, world to world, feeding on positive emotions. Not just removing them, actually consuming them. Every few centuries, it goes dormant, but it always returns. What happened to the civilizations it attacked before? The doctor's expression grew grim. Most simply, stopped. They continued to exist biologically, but they lost the will to create, to explore, to grow. Some species went extinct within generations because they lost the desire to reproduce. Others became so insular and hopeless that their civilizations collapsed from within. Sarah stared at the massive entity moving through the system with horrifying purpose. And no one's ever stopped it? The Galactic Council has tried everything. Military fleets, AI systems, even attempts at negotiation. Nothing works. Vorthak seems to be immune to conventional weapons, and it corrupts any artificial intelligence that tries to interface with it. As for negotiation, Dr. Martinez scrolled through more records. Every diplomatic mission has come back completely devoid of hope. They function, but they're basically living shells. Lieutenant Tanaka looked up from her console. Captain, long-range scans show Vorthak is heading for the inner systems. At current velocity, it'll reach Earth in approximately 6 days. The bridge fell silent. Earth, humanity's homeworld, with its 8 billion inhabitants. Sarah thought of her daughter playing in the gardens of New Geneva, of the children she'd seen laughing in the parks of Luna's city, of the festivals and celebrations that made human culture so vibrant. Any word from the Galactic Council, she asked. David checked his communications array. They've issued a general evacuation advisory for all systems in Vorthak's path. But, Captain. He hesitated. The evacuation isn't for safety. According to their projections, anyone who evacuates will just be delaying the inevitable. Vorthak will eventually consume the entire galaxy. Dr. Martinez pulled up a galactic map showing Vorthak's historical path. System after system marked in red dead zones where joy had been extinguished forever. The entity doesn't just feed randomly. It seeks out the most vibrant, creative civilizations first. It's drawn to happiness like a moth to flame. Which means Earth is going to be one of its priority targets. Human culture is remarkably joyful compared to most galactic civilizations. Our music, our art, our festivals, our capacity for wonder were basically a beacon for this thing. Sarah stood, decision crystallizing in her mind. Set course for Earth. Maximum speed. Captain, Engineer Park called out, our hyperspace drive is already at the red line. We can't push it any harder without risking core breach. Then, we'll risk it. Alert all human colonies and stations. Tell them what's coming. She paused, looking out at the silent trading station. And, send a message to the Galactic Council. Tell them humanity is not going to evacuate. Ma'am? Lieutenant Tanaka looked confused. What are we going to do that 3,000 years of galactic civilization couldn't? Sarah smiled, and, for a moment, the bridge seemed a little brighter. It was a distinctly human expression, defiant hope in the face of impossible odds. I don't know yet. But, I know we're going to try something different. Every species that's faced Vorthak has approached it as warriors, scientists, or philosophers. But, no one's ever approached it as humans. As the Harmony jumped to hyperspace, racing toward Earth ahead of the cosmic destroyer, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their species' relative newcomer status in the galaxy might actually be an advantage. Humanity hadn't learned yet that some things were impossible. 3 days later, Earth's communication networks lit up with the most urgent message in human history. Within hours, the planet's response defied everything the Galactic Council had predicted. Instead of mass panic or immediate evacuation, something unprecedented began to happen. Children started drawing pictures of the monster in the sky. Artists began composing songs about facing the darkness. Scientists worked around the clock not to find weapons or shields, but to understand what joy meant on a neurological level and how to protect it. And, in a small farming colony on the edge of human space, an 8-year-old girl named Emma Rodriguez heard the news and did something that would echo across the galaxy. She laughed. Not because she didn't understand the danger, but because she had just realized something that no adult, human or alien, had considered. If this Vorthak creature was coming to steal everyone's joy, then the obvious solution was to make so much joy that it couldn't possibly steal it all. Emma's laugh was heard by her parents, who smiled despite their fear. Her parents' smiles were seen by their neighbors, who found themselves chuckling despite the dire news. Within hours, the entire colony was engaged in an impromptu festival, not to ignore the approaching threat, but to face it with the most human response imaginable. They chose to be happy. As news of the colony's response spread across human networks, something remarkable happened. Instead of falling into despair like every other species before them, humanity began to rally. Not with weapons or shields, but with music and laughter and art and the stubborn, brilliant, beautiful refusal to let anyone, even a cosmic entity older than their entire civilization, tell them they couldn't be joyful. In deep space, still 3 days from Earth, Vorthak paused. For the first time in 3 millennia, the ancient entity encountered something it had never experienced before, a species that responded to the threat of having their joy stolen by creating more joy than had ever existed in the galaxy. The universe held its breath as an unstoppable force met an immovable spirit of human determination. What happened next would determine not just the fate of Earth, but the future of happiness itself among the stars. Dr. Kenji Nakamura had been studying xenopsychology for 30 years, but he had never seen anything like the data streaming across his screens in the Geneva Research Center. As Vorthak moved closer to Earth, every monitoring station in human space was recording unprecedented neural activity. Director Chen, he called to his supervisor, "You need to see this." Director Lisa Chen hurried over to his workstation, where holographic displays showed real-time brain scans from volunteers across human colonies. The patterns were unlike anything in their databases. "These readings are from the Proxima Centauri colony," Dr. Nakamura explained, highlighting specific neural pathways. Dopamine levels are 300% above baseline. Serotonin production is off the charts. But here's the strange part, these aren't stress responses or artificial stimulation. These people are genuinely, profoundly happy. Director Chen studied the data. What's causing it? Reports indicate they're having what they call joy parties. Massive gatherings where they're sharing stories, creating art, singing, dancing, anything that generates positive emotions. But it's not just recreational. They're treating it like a form of resistance. Dr. Nakamura pulled up another display. Here's data from the Luna colonies. Same pattern. And here's Europa Station, and the Mars settlements, and even the deep space mining platforms. Everywhere humans live, the same response is emerging independently. They're fighting back against something they haven't even encountered yet? It's more than that. Dr. Nakamura's excitement was palpable. They're not just maintaining their normal levels of happiness. They're exceeding anything we've ever measured in human psychology. It's as if the threat itself is triggering some kind of evolutionary response. On the other side of the research center, Dr. Sarah Okafor was analyzing the sociological implications. Her team had been monitoring human communication networks since the threat became known, and what they discovered challenged every assumption about how civilizations respond to existential threats. "Director," she called out, "we're seeing something remarkable in the pattern of human response. Every other species that faced Vorthak either fought it militarily or tried to hide from it. Humans are doing something completely different." She displayed a global communication map showing the flow of information across human space. Instead of centralized military response or mass evacuation, we're seeing spontaneous cultural creation on an unprecedented scale. New songs are being composed every hour. Artists are creating collaborative works across light years. Children are inventing games specifically designed to generate laughter. Director Chen examined the data flows. It looks like they're trying to outcreate the destruction? Exactly. But here's what's truly extraordinary. Dr. Okafor highlighted specific communication patterns. This isn't being coordinated by any government or organization. It's emerging organically from human communities. As if our species has some kind of collective unconscious response to threats against our emotional well-being. Meanwhile, in Earth's orbital command center, Admiral Rebecca Torres was facing the most unusual military briefing in human history. Her staff had assembled every piece of intelligence about Vorthak, but their recommendations defied all conventional military wisdom. "Admiral," reported Colonel Michael Harrison, "our tactical analysis suggests that conventional weapons are completely ineffective against this entity. Energy-based attacks appear to strengthen it, and kinetic weapons pass right through its form." "What about psychological warfare?" asked Admiral Torres. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the fleet's xenopsychologist, stepped forward. "Ma'am, based on the historical data, Vorthack doesn't communicate in any way our languages can process. It operates on pure emotional wavelengths. Traditional psychological warfare assumes a rational enemy. This entity is something else." Admiral Torres studied the tactical displays showing Vorthack's approach. "Then, what do you recommend?" Colonel Harrison exchanged glances with Dr. Walsh. "Ma'am, this is going to sound unconventional, but our analysis suggests that the civilian response may actually be our most effective defense." "Explain." Dr. Walsh pulled up comparative charts. "Every species Vorthack has encountered has responded with fear, despair, or anger. Those emotions seem to make the entity stronger. But humans are responding with something unprecedented, defiant joy. Our monitoring stations are picking up psychic resonances from human communities that don't match any known patterns." "You're suggesting we fight this thing with happiness?" "We're suggesting that happiness may be the only thing it can't consume," Colonel Harrison replied. "Think about it, Admiral. For 3,000 years, this entity has fed on civilizations by draining their positive emotions. But what if it encounters more positive emotion than it can process? What if we overload it?" Admiral Torres was quiet for a long moment. Every instinct trained by decades of military service told her this was insane. You fought threats with superior firepower, better tactics, stronger defenses. You didn't fight cosmic entities with music and laughter. But then, she thought about the reports streaming in from across human space. Entire colonies spontaneously organizing festivals. Space stations broadcasting concerts into the void. Children sending drawings to Earth depicting humans dancing with strange alien monsters. The universal human response to being told they couldn't be happy was to become more joyful than ever before. "Patch me through to all human settlements," she ordered. Within minutes, Admiral Torres was addressing 8 billion humans on Earth and millions more scattered across the colonies. Her message was brief and unlike anything in military history. "Citizens of humanity," she began, "we face an enemy that seeks to steal our joy. Every species before us has failed because they fought with weapons and fear. We're going to try something different. We're going to fight with everything that makes us human: our laughter, our creativity, our stubborn refusal to let anyone tell us we can't be happy. This is not a retreat or a surrender. This is humanity declaring war on despair itself." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, Earth transformed into a planet-wide celebration. Not a mindless party or denial of danger, but a deliberate, defiant celebration of human spirit. Scientists worked around the clock not to build weapons, but to understand the physics of joy. Engineers designed sound systems to broadcast human music into space. Artists created works specifically intended to generate maximum positive emotion. On the small farming colony where Emma Rodriguez lived, something even more remarkable was happening. The 8-year-old had become an unofficial leader of what the children called Operation Giggle. While adults organized festivals and concerts, Emma and her friends were conducting their own form of research. "If the monster eats happy feelings," Emma explained to her friend Marcus while they built a fort from recycled habitat panels, "then we need to figure out what kind of happy feelings are the hardest to eat." Marcus, who was 6 and took Emma's theories very seriously, nodded thoughtfully. "My mom says some happiness is like candy, sweet but gone quick. And some happiness is like a good dinner that keeps you full for a long time." Emma's eyes lit up. "Exactly. So we need to make the dinner kind of happiness. The kind that sticks around and grows bigger." They spent the afternoon conducting what they called happiness experiments. They tried different kinds of laughter, silly jokes versus happy surprises versus the warm feeling of helping someone. They tested whether shared happiness was stronger than individual happiness. They even created what they called happiness recipes, specific combinations of activities that generated the most lasting positive emotions. What Emma and Marcus didn't realize was that their childish experiments were being monitored by Earth's research centers, and their findings were remarkably consistent with the most advanced xenopsychological theories. Children, with their natural understanding of joy, were discovering principles that adult scientists were struggling to quantify. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, Vorthak was experiencing something it had never encountered in 3 millennia of existence. As it approached the human solar system, its feeding tentacles were detecting not the usual patterns of fear and despair, but waves of positive emotion unlike anything in its memory. The entity paused in its approach. Throughout its existence, it had consumed the joy of millions of worlds, growing stronger with each feeding. But the emotional resonance coming from human space was different. Instead of the declining despair that usually preceded its arrival, the positive emotions were growing stronger. More complex. More resilient. Vorthak extended its consciousness toward Earth, trying to understand this anomaly. What it found defied its understanding of how sentient species responded to existential threats. Instead of preparation for war or evacuation, it sensed celebration. Instead of fear, it detected something it had never encountered: anticipation. The humans weren't just waiting for it, they were excited to meet it. For the first time in its existence, Vorthak felt something that might have been confusion. Every species it had encountered followed predictable patterns. They fought, they fled, or they fell into despair. But these humans were doing something unprecedented. They were treating its approach as an opportunity for joy. The entity probed deeper into human communication networks, trying to understand their strategy. What it discovered was even more baffling. There was no strategy. No coordinated response. No centralized planning. The humans were simply being human. They were responding to the threat of losing their happiness by creating more happiness than they had ever produced before. As Vorthak continued its approach toward Earth, now only 48 hours away, something unprecedented began to happen. For the first time in 3,000 years of feeding on galactic civilizations, the ancient entity began to feel curious. What were these humans? Why weren't they afraid? And why did their joy taste different from anything it had ever consumed? In the depths of space, an unstoppable force was about to meet an immovable celebration. And, somewhere on a small farming colony, an 8-year-old girl was putting the finishing touches on a plan that would either save the galaxy or result in the most spectacular failure in human history. Emma Rodriguez was about to prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe is a child who refuses to stop laughing. The moment Vorthak entered Earth's solar system, every monitoring station in human space registered an event that defied scientific understanding. The ancient entity didn't arrive with the cosmic fanfare that 3,000 years of galactic history had documented. Instead, it simply appeared, as if the fabric of spacetime had opened like a door and allowed something impossible to step through. Dr. Elena Martinez, now aboard the flightship Unity in Earth's orbital defense grid, watched her instruments with growing amazement. Captain Chan, these readings don't match any of the historical data. Vorthak's energy signature is fluctuating. Captain Sarachan studied the main display where the massive entity hung in space like a living shadow against the stars. Up close, it was even more disturbing than long-range sensors had indicated. The spherical body seemed to shift and pulse, while tentacles of pure void extended in all directions, reaching toward Earth and its colonies with obvious hunger. Fluctuating how? According to the archives, Vorthak's energy pattern should be consistent, a steady psychic transmission that drains positive emotions from any sentient being in range. But we're seeing spikes and variations I can't explain. Dr. Martinez pulled up comparative data. Captain, I think it's reacting to us. The entity's psychic output keeps changing frequency, as if it's scanning us. Trying to find the right wavelength to drain our emotions. Is it working? Dr. Martinez checked her readings of the human crew. That's the strange part. Our dopamine and serotonin levels are actually increasing. The crew is becoming happier in direct response to Vorthak's presence. On Earth's surface, the same phenomenon was occurring on a planetary scale. Instead of the crushing despair that had fallen over every other world Vorthak had visited, humanity was experiencing what psychologists were calling defiant euphoria. The entity's attempts to drain human joy were having the opposite effect, they were triggering an almost manic celebration of life. In New Tokyo, millions of people had gathered in the streets for an impromptu festival. Children flew kites shaped like tentacle monsters while laughing at their own audacity. In Sao Paulo, massive screens displayed real-time images of Vorthak while orchestras played triumphant music composed specifically for this moment. In Cairo, artists were creating murals depicting humans dancing with cosmic entities under starlit skies. But, perhaps the most remarkable response was happening on Emma Rodriguez's farming colony. The 8-year-old had convinced the entire settlement of 3,000 people to participate in what she called the Big Giggle Project. Listen, Emma explained to the assembled colonists, standing on a makeshift platform in the central plaza, if this monster wants to eat our happy feelings, then, we need to make feelings it can't eat. Her father, Miguel Rodriguez, watched with a mixture of pride and concern as his daughter addressed the crowd like a general preparing for battle. Emma, sweetie, what kind of feelings can't be eaten? Emma's 8-year-old logic was crystal clear. The sharing kind. When you share happiness, you don't lose it, you make more. So if we all share our happiness at exactly the same time, we'll make so much that the monster will get too full and have to go away. The colonists exchanged glances. It sounded like the reasoning of a child, but, then, again, every adult solution had failed for 3,000 years. Dr. Amanda Foster, the colony's chief administrator, made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. All right, Emma. What do you need us to do? Emma's plan was beautifully simple. At precisely the moment Vorthak's feeding tentacles reached their colony, every colonist would simultaneously engage in their most joyful memory while physically connecting to their neighbors. Hand in hand, the entire settlement would form a chain of shared happiness that would, in Emma's words, be too big and bouncy for the monster to swallow. What the colonists didn't realize was that Emma's intuitive understanding of joy as a shareable, renewable resource was consistent with cutting-edge research in quantum consciousness theory. Some scientists had theorized that positive emotions might actually increase when shared, creating a kind of psychic resonance that could theoretically overwhelm entities that fed on such emotions. As Vorthak's tentacles began to extend toward Earth, the entity encountered something unprecedented in its 3-millennium existence. Instead of the usual patterns of individual fear and despair, it detected vast networks of interconnected joy. Humans weren't just being happy, they were being happy together, creating emotional resonances that defied the entity's understanding of how sentient consciousness worked. The first tentacle to reach Earth's atmosphere touched down in the Australian outback, where Aboriginal communities had organized what they called a Dreamtime for the Stars, a massive gathering of traditional songs and stories specifically adapted to welcome cosmic visitors. As the tentacle made contact, attempting to drain the participants' joy, something extraordinary happened. Instead of the usual flow of positive emotion from the targets to the entity, Vorthak encountered a feedback loop. The human's joy wasn't diminishing, it was amplifying. Each person's happiness was being reinforced by their neighbors, creating a resonance cascade that actually pushed energy back toward the entity. For the first time in its existence, Vorthak experienced something that might have been discomfort. The feedback from the human joy network was unlike anything it had ever encountered. Instead of the clean, simple emotional energy it was accustomed to consuming, this was complex, multifaceted, and, somehow, infectious. More tentacles reached toward other human settlements, and each contact produced the same result. In the floating cities of Venus, colonists had organized synchronized laughter sessions. On Mars, children were conducting happiness parades through the habitat domes. On Europa Station, researchers were broadcasting what they called joy equations, mathematical formulas that described the patterns of human happiness. But, it was Emma's colony that produced the most dramatic effect. As Vorthak's largest feeding tentacle descended toward the settlement, 3,000 humans formed a perfect chain, hand in hand, encircling their entire habitat. At Emma's signal, they all simultaneously shared their most joyful memory while physically connected to their neighbors. The result was beyond anything Earth's scientists had theorized. The combined emotional resonance of 3,000 humans sharing pure joy created what could only be described as a psychic explosion. Instead of draining their happiness, Vorthax's tentacle was overwhelmed by a tsunami of positive emotion that cascaded back through its entire nervous system. The ancient entity recoiled, pulling its tentacles back from Earth's surface for the first time in recorded galactic history. In the depths of space, Vorthax's massive form writhed with what observers could only interpret as confusion and, perhaps, indigestion. Captain Chen, Dr. Martinez called out from her station aboard the Unity, "You're not going to believe this. Vorthax's energy signature just hiccuped." "What do you mean hiccuped?" "I mean it actually paused its psychic feeding process. According to these readings, the entity just experienced what we might call psychic nausea. The human emotional feedback was so intense that it disrupted Vorthax's digestive processes." Captain Chen stared at the displays showing Vorthax's tentacles withdrawing from Earth. "Are you telling me we just gave a cosmic entity indigestion with happiness?" "That's actually a very accurate description, Captain." On Earth's surface, human celebration reached new heights. The news that their joy had actually caused Vorthax physical discomfort spread across communication networks at light speed. Instead of feeling victorious, however, humans began to experience something that would prove even more destabilizing to the ancient entity. They began to feel sorry for it. In broadcast stations across Earth and its colonies, the sentiment was remarkably consistent. "Poor thing," said a grandmother in Tokyo. "It's probably just lonely and doesn't know any better." Children began drawing pictures of Vorthax not as a monster, but as a sad, confused creature that needed friends. Artists started composing songs about healing cosmic pain with understanding. Dr. Martinez watched her instruments with growing amazement. "Captain, the human emotional output is shifting. The joy is still there, but it's being combined with something else. Compassion, empathy, they're starting to feel sympathy for an entity that was trying to devour their happiness." "Is that affecting Vorthax?" "The entity's energy patterns are becoming increasingly erratic. It's never encountered prey that responded to its feeding attempts with concern for its welfare." Aboard the Unity, xenopsychologist Dr. James Park was analyzing the broader implications. "Captain, I think we're witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Every species Vorthax has encountered has responded with fear, anger, or despair. But humans are responding with joy, and, now, empathy. The entity's entire feeding mechanism seems to be designed for negative emotional responses. It literally doesn't know how to process compassion." Meanwhile, on Emma's colony, the 8-year-old was having what she would later describe as her biggest idea ever. Surrounded by adults still holding hands from their successful happiness chain, Emma looked up at the stars where Vorthax's form was visible as a dark patch against the starfield. "I think it's sad," she announced to the gathered colonists. Her mother, Dr. Sofia Rodriguez, knelt down beside her daughter. "What do you mean, Mija?" "The monster. I think it's sad and that's why it eats happiness. Like when Marcus gets grumpy because he's hungry, but for feelings instead of food." Miguel Rodriguez looked at his daughter with wonder. "So what do you think we should do?" Emma's smile could have powered a fusion reactor. "We should invite it to our party. If it's hungry for happiness, we should share ours instead of letting it steal. Sharing is better than stealing, right?" The adults exchanged glances. The logic was so simple, so fundamentally human, that it took their breath away. Every galactic civilization had tried to fight Vorthax or hide from it. No one had ever considered simply befriending it. As Emma's suggestion spread across human communication networks, something remarkable began to happen. Instead of preparing for further defense, human communities began preparing for the most ambitious first contact celebration in galactic history. If Vorthax was hungry for joy, they would offer it the greatest feast of happiness the universe had ever seen. But they wouldn't do it as prey offering appeasement to a predator. They would do it as humans offering friendship to a lonely, misunderstood creature that had been wandering the galaxy for 3,000 years without anyone ever trying to understand what it really needed. In the depths of space, Vorthax felt the shift in human emotional resonance and experienced something it had never felt before. The prey species that had just overwhelmed its feeding mechanisms with unprecedented joy was now inviting it to join them. For an entity that had spent 3 millennia consuming civilizations, the concept of being invited to participate in one was as alien as anything it had ever encountered. The ancient being hung in space, its tentacles withdrawn, trying to process this new development. What were these humans? And why did their emotional patterns make it feel something that might have been hope? The preparation for what historians would later call the Great Invitation began 12 hours after Vortac's withdrawal from Earth's atmosphere. What started as Emma Rodriguez's simple suggestion to invite the cosmic entity to their party quickly evolved into the most ambitious diplomatic event in galactic history. Admiral Rebecca Torres found herself coordinating not military defenses, but party planning on an interplanetary scale. Her command center had been transformed from a war room into something that looked more like a festival organizing committee, complete with holographic displays showing cake designs and musical performance schedules. "Admiral," reported Colonel Harrison, "the Lunid colonies have completed their happiness amplification arrays. They're basically massive speakers designed to broadcast human emotional resonance into space. The Mars settlements have finished their Friendship Beacon project, a light display visible from orbit that spells out welcome in over 300 galactic languages." Admiral Torres reviewed the status reports with a mixture of amusement and amazement. "Colonel, in 30 years of military service, I never imagined I'd be coordinating the deployment of joy cannons and empathy missiles. Ma'am, the engineering teams are calling them compassion catalysts and understanding amplifiers. Apparently, the technical terminology makes them feel more dignified about weaponizing friendship." On Earth's surface, the preparation was equally unprecedented. Dr. Kenji Nakamura's research team had developed what they called emotional translation matrices, devices that could convert human feelings into mathematical patterns that might be comprehensible to a cosmic entity. Artists worldwide were collaborating on what they termed universal happiness expressions, songs, dances, and visual art designed to communicate joy across species barriers. But perhaps the most important preparation was happening in schools and youth centers across human space, where children were crafting what Emma had dubbed friendship gifts for their cosmic visitor. These weren't weapons or shields, but drawings, songs, poems, and handmade crafts expressing welcome and understanding. Dr. Sofia Rodriguez, a xenobiologist by training but now functioning as her daughter's unofficial advisor, watched Emma work on her own friendship gift with wonder. The 8-year-old was creating what she called a happiness map, a three-dimensional model showing how joy moved between people when it was shared. "See, Mama?" Emma explained, pointing to colorful threads connecting small figures in her model. "When someone is sad and alone, there's no connections. But when people share happiness, it makes webs that get stronger and bigger. I think the monster doesn't know about the webs." Dr. Rodriguez studied her daughter's intuitive understanding of social psychology. "What makes you think it doesn't know about sharing, Mija?" Emma's response was profound in its simplicity. "Because if it knew about sharing, it wouldn't need to steal. Stealing only gets you a little bit, and then it's gone. But sharing gets you more and more forever." Meanwhile, aboard the research vessel Harmony, Dr. Elena Martinez was analyzing Vortac's behavior patterns since its initial withdrawal. The entity remained in Earth's solar system but had made no further attempts to feed. Instead, it seemed to be observing. "Captain Chen," she reported, "Vortac's energy patterns suggested scanning our communications, our cultural broadcasts, our emotional resonances. It's like it's trying to understand what we are before making its next move. Any indication of its intentions? That's the fascinating part. The entity's psychic emanations have shifted from predatory to curious. It's exhibiting behavioral patterns we've never seen in the historical records. Vortac appears to be learning." Captain Chen studied the tactical display showing the entity's position relative to Earth and its colonies. "Learning what?" "How to interact with a species that doesn't respond to it with fear. Every civilization it's encountered has been prey. But humans refuse to act like prey, so it's having to develop entirely new behavioral patterns. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, the Galactic Council's archives. Dr. Amanda Foster, the administrator from Emma's colony, had been researching the earliest records of Vortac encounters, looking for any clue about the entity's origins. What she found changed everything. "Emma," she said, calling the 8-year-old to her office, "I think you're right about the monster being sad. look at this. She displayed a holographic record from the ancient Zentran civilization, one of Vorthak's earliest recorded victims. But, unlike later accounts that focused on the entity's destructive capabilities, these records described its first appearance. According to the Zentrans, Vorthak didn't start as a destroyer. It was originally what they called a joy seeker, an entity that was attracted to happiness and celebration. But, the first species it encountered interpreted its approach as an attack and responded with weapons. Emma studied the ancient records with the serious expression she used for important discoveries. So they scared it? It's worse than that. The Zentrans' defensive measures included psychic weapons designed to cause pain and fear. They attacked Vorthak with the emotional equivalent of poison. The entity learned to expect pain when it approached other species, so it began taking their joy first, before they could hurt it. Emma's eyes widened with understanding. It's not a monster. It's just scared and hungry and doesn't know how to ask for help. Dr. Foster nodded. Emma, I think your friendship gift might be the most important diplomatic document in galactic history. As news of this discovery spread across human communication networks, the nature of the Great Invitation shifted from a defensive celebration to something far more significant, the first attempt in galactic history to heal 3,000 years of cosmic trauma through the simple act of genuine friendship. The celebration was scheduled to begin when Earth's rotation brought Emma's colony into optimal position for communication with Vorthak. The plan was elegantly simple. Humans across the solar system would simultaneously engage in their highest forms of joy: music, art, dance, laughter, love, while broadcasting a unified message of welcome and understanding. But, the true centerpiece of the event would be Emma's presentation of her friendship gift directly to Vorthak. Using the most powerful communication arrays in human space, the 8-year-old would make first contact with an entity that had been wandering the galaxy alone for 3 millennia. As the appointed hour approached, Vorthak's behavior patterns changed dramatically. The entity began moving closer to Earth, its tentacles extending not in predatory reaching, but in what xenopsychologists interpreted as curiosity gestures. For the first time in recorded history, the cosmic destroyer was approaching a civilization without intent to feed. In the command center aboard the Unity, Dr. Martinez watched her readings with growing excitement. Captain, Vorthak's psychic emanations are shifting to frequencies we've never recorded. It's almost as if the entity is hopeful. Captain Chan monitored the global preparations with wonder. Across Earth and its colonies, 8 billion humans were preparing to welcome an entity that every other species had fled from or fought against. Children were practicing their presentation songs. Artists were putting finishing touches on collaborative works designed to communicate universal concepts of friendship. Scientists were calibrating emotional amplification devices with the same precision usually reserved for weapons systems. On Emma's colony, the 8-year-old stood in the central plaza surrounded by 3,000 colonists who had become her allies in the most audacious diplomatic mission in galactic history. In her hands, she held her friendship gift, the happiness map that showed how joy grew when shared rather than hoarded. "Are you ready, Mija?" asked her father, Miguel, his voice filled with pride and terror in equal measure. Emma looked up at the stars where Vorthak's form was visible as a dark shape against the cosmos, and her smile could have lit up the galaxy. "I think it's been waiting for someone to be its friend for a really, really long time. I don't want it to wait anymore." As Earth's rotation brought the colony into position, human celebration began across the solar system. Music rose from every settlement, art blazed across communication networks, and the combined emotional resonance of humanity's joy reached out into space like a warm embrace. But, at the center of it all was one 8-year-old girl, speaking directly to a cosmic entity with the fearless compassion that only children possessed, about to prove that the greatest force in the universe wasn't destruction or consumption, but the simple act of offering friendship to someone who had never experienced it before. "Hello, Vorthak," Emma's voice echoed across space, carried by communication arrays that transformed her words into patterns of light and emotion that could reach across the void. "My name is Emma, and I want to be your friend. I made you a present to show you how happiness works when you share it instead of taking it. Would you like to learn how to be happy with us?" In the depths of space, an ancient entity that had consumed the joy of countless civilizations encountered something it had never experienced in 3,000 years of existence: a sincere invitation to join the very thing it had been seeking all along. Vorthak's response would determine not just the fate of humanity, but the future of happiness itself among the stars. The moment Emma's invitation reached Vorthak, every monitoring station in human space registered an event that defied 3,000 years of galactic understanding. The ancient entity's energy signature suddenly shifted from the predatory frequencies that had terrorized civilizations to something entirely new, a pattern that xenopsychologists would later identify as the cosmic equivalent of surprise. For 30 seconds, Vorthak hung motionless in space, its massive form no longer writhing with hunger but perfectly still, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, slowly, the entity began to respond. Dr. Elena Martinez watched her instruments aboard the Unity with growing amazement. "Captain Chen, it's trying to communicate. Not through psychic domination, but actual communication. The entity is modulating its energy patterns to match human neural frequencies." Captain Sarah Chen leaned forward in her command chair. "Can we understand what it's saying?" "The computer is working on translation matrices, but, Captain, I think it's trying to say hello back." Across the solar system, humans paused in their celebration as Vorthak's response reached them. It wasn't words or images, but something far more profound, a wave of pure emotion that conveyed 3 millennia of cosmic loneliness, confusion, and desperate hunger for the very thing it had been destroying. In the research center on Luna, Dr. Kenji Nakamura was analyzing the emotional patterns with tears streaming down his face. "Director Chen, these readings. Vorthak isn't a predator. It's a child. An ancient, cosmic child that's been lost and starving for emotional connection since before human civilization existed." On Emma's colony, the 8-year-old felt Vorthak's response as a wash of sadness so profound that it took her breath away. But, instead of being overwhelmed, Emma did what came naturally to her. She reached out with her heart. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered, her words carrying across space through the colony's communication array. "You've been so lonely for so long. It's okay. You don't have to be alone anymore." What happened next would be recorded as the most significant moment in galactic history. Vorthak's massive form began to change, the writhing tentacles of void slowly transforming into something that looked almost like arms reaching out for an embrace. The entity wasn't trying to consume anymore, it was trying to connect. Emma held up her friendship gift, the happiness map that showed how joy multiplied when shared. "See? This is how it works. When you share happiness, both people get more. Want to try it with me?" The response was immediate. Vorthak extended what could only be described as a tendril of pure curiosity toward Earth, but, instead of the predatory feeding attempts of before, this touch was gentle, tentative, the cosmic equivalent of a shy child reaching out to make a friend. When the tendril made contact with Emma's emotional resonance, something unprecedented happened. Instead of draining her joy, Vorthak began to share its own feelings, eons of wandering through the galaxy, desperate for the warmth and connection it could sense in other beings but never understand how to achieve. The entity had been consuming joy not out of malice, but out of a primitive, instinctual attempt to fill a void in its own existence that it didn't know how to heal. Emma felt all of this in an instant, and her response was pure, instinctual compassion. She began to laugh, not the nervous laughter of fear, but the warm, inclusive laughter of someone welcoming a new friend. Her laughter carried with it all the joy of her 8 years of life, birthday parties and bedtime stories, playing with friends and discovering new things, the warmth of her parents' love and the excitement of adventure. But, more importantly, her laughter carried an invitation. It said, "This is what happiness feels like when it's shared. This is what you've been looking for all along." The effect on Vorthak was transformational. For the first time in 3 millennia, the entity experienced genuine joy, not stolen or consumed, but freely given by a being who asked nothing in return except friendship. The sensation was so overwhelming that Vorthak's entire energy matrix began to shift, the dark void of its form slowly brightening as it learned, for the first time, how to be happy instead of hungry. Across the galaxy, the effects were immediate and miraculous. On worlds that Vorthak had drained of joy centuries before, people suddenly began to smile again. The entity's transformation was somehow reversing its past feeding, returning the happiness it had consumed to the civilizations it had emptied. Trading stations that had been silent for months suddenly erupted in celebration. Species that had forgotten how to laugh rediscovered the sound of their own joy. Dr. Martinez watched her readings with wonder. "Captain, Vorthak is broadcasting Emma's laughter across the galaxy. It's sharing her joy with every world it has ever touched." On Earth, humans watched in amazement as their cosmic visitor began to change before their eyes. The writhing mass of void was transforming into something beautiful, a crystalline entity that sparkled like a living constellation, its form now radiating warmth instead of consuming light. Emma clapped her hands in delight. "You're so pretty when you're happy. Do you want to learn more ways to share joy?" Vorthak's response came not in words but in pure emotion, gratitude so profound it brought tears to the eyes of every human in the solar system. The entity had spent 3,000 years seeking something it had never understood, and, in one moment of genuine friendship from an 8-year-old child, it had found not just what it was looking for, but a reason to heal the damage it had caused. Over the following days, as Vorthak learned to communicate more clearly with its new human friends, the full extent of the transformation became clear. The entity had evolved beyond its primitive feeding instincts into something entirely new, a cosmic gardener of joy, dedicated to spreading and nurturing happiness throughout the galaxy instead of consuming it. Emma became Vorthak's first and most cherished teacher, showing the ancient entity the countless ways that humans created and shared happiness. They played games together across the vast distances of space, with Vorthak learning to enjoy simple pleasures like storytelling and music. The entity discovered that creating joy was infinitely more satisfying than consuming it, and that friendship was the greatest treasure in the universe. The Galactic Council, stunned by humanity's success where every other species had failed, officially recognized Earth as the diplomatic capital of the galaxy. But, more importantly, they established the Emma Rodriguez Protocol, a new approach to first contact based on compassion, understanding, and the radical idea that even the most fearsome entities might simply be lonely beings in need of friendship. Vorthak, now calling itself by the name Emma had given it, Sparkles, became humanity's ambassador to the cosmic community. Together, they traveled from world to world, healing the damage that centuries of fear and consumption had caused, and teaching other species the human arts of celebration, creativity, and unconditional friendship. Years later, when Emma was grown and serving as Earth's chief happiness officer, a position created specifically for her, she would often look up at the stars and smile at the sight of Sparkles dancing through space, spreading joy to worlds that had forgotten what laughter sounded like. The little girl who had refused to let a cosmic entity steal her joy had not only saved the galaxy, she had transformed it into a place where happiness was shared rather than hoarded, where loneliness was healed through connection, and where the greatest strength any species could possess was the simple courage to offer friendship to someone who needed it. In the end, the universe learned what humans had always known, that laughter really was the best medicine, that joy multiplied when shared, and that sometimes the most powerful force in existence was an 8-year-old child who refused to believe that anyone, even a cosmic monster, was beyond the reach of friendship. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly how it should be. As Emma often said in her speeches to the Galactic Council, everyone needs friends, even the scary ones. Especially the scary ones. Because the scariest monsters are usually just the loneliest. Vorthak, now Sparkles, would have agreed wholeheartedly, if it could still remember what it felt like to be a monster instead of a friend. But those days were just a distant memory now, lost in the brightness of a universe filled with laughter and the warm glow of shared joy. The Grinch of the galaxy had indeed stolen every ornament from every world it visited. But, in the end, it learned that the greatest gift wasn't something you could steal, it was something you could only receive when you opened your heart to the possibility of love. And, thanks to one 8-year-old girl named Emma Rodriguez, the galaxy learned that lesson too.